Hello, welcome. Welcome everybody to this session. And if you've been around the festival the whole time since Thursday, well done for keeping the energy going and still coming to sessions on this day. So I know it'll be worth it. Got a great set of panelists here today, and what I'm sure will be a very interesting discussion. I'm Kelly Walls. I'm the Executive Director of the Guardian Foundation, and the Guardian Foundation, we're a non-profit. We raise funds to deliver programs to protect access to reliable journalism and giving people the ability to hold power to account. One area that we work in is news and media literacy and giving people sort of critical skills to identify mis and disinformation. Another area is around creating opportunities to bring underrepresented voices into journalism and create more diversity in the industry. And the third area is media viability. So working with independent media on their strategies for news and particularly in areas that are compromised. So through that part of our work, we've seen a lot of capacity building programs and sort of funding around independent media that center around training. And last year at this festival, it really stuck with me. Somebody said, "We're being trained to death, but that's the only way that we can access the funding." And so today we're asking the question, what's the alternative? So what's the alternative for enabling really great news strategies? And we've got that from the perspective of a journalism funder. So to my right, Sue Valentine, Division Director of Journalism in OSF's global program on expression. Someone focused on finding solutions. So to the far right over there, Jakub Parusinski, founder and director of the Fix Media, and yeah, focused on finding solutions to some of journalism's biggest challenges. And then in the middle, we've got the leader of a brilliant independent news organization, Daryna Shevchenko from the Kyiv Independent, CEO of the Kyiv Independent. So thank you all for being here today and having this discussion. We actually wanted to start with you rather than the panelists. So around, like, how many of you can say, you know, you've been part of some of these journalism trainings in your career? Just as a show of hands, how many people? Yeah, quite a lot, okay. And keep your hands up if you have been able to really kind of take those trainings back to your newsroom and make change and really sort of implement what you'd learned in those trainings. Okay, slightly less, not too sure, maybe sometimes, yeah, little wavy hands. So, yeah, I mean, we wanted to kind of use this session as a bit of a learning opportunity. That was the first one for us, is to get a sense of the room. The second one is you've all been given little cards. And if you wish you were on the panel, sort of saying stuff and talking, we will try and have some Q&A at the end. But just write down some of your thoughts, write down some of your experiences. We'd love to hear, like, good experiences, like not so good experiences, what's worked, any thoughts that you're having around that, you know, journalism training, and then we're going to gather them up at the end and have a little bit of a survey. So thank you for that. So enough from me. Daryna, I want to come to you first. In your experience, I guess not only in your current role, but in the years that you actually spent in media development as well before this current role, what are some of the best examples of what's available that does meet the needs of news organizations and of independent media in particular already, but also where are the gaps?
Yeah, so when I started when I started in media development some 10 years ago or 12 years ago, there was a lot of trainings already available. The problem was that, and I think it still is, that the trainings were targeting the wrong people for the wrong topics. So basically there were a lot of change-making trainings, editorial standards trainings that were targeting junior journalists who, you know, they would listen to it and then come back to their newsrooms and, well, do the same thing because they're not the decision makers. Or, you know, there were trainings talking about media management to the editors who were at capacity doing the editorial work and couldn't really have even enough time to go into media management, and these are, by the way, totally different jobs. So that was happening, and there was I think there was a lack of practical element to it. So all the trainings were just, say a couple of days or a couple of hours of just theory, and then these people, you kind of learn in theory how to do something, but then you don't have any practice, so you go back and you go to the old ways. So when I started doing it, my initial idea was to heavily combine it with trainings with practice. So I started attaching internships to every journalism training I was doing. Basically, if you're trained for 5 days, you would have 2 weeks internship in a media outlet, in a partnering media outlet, where you work in an actual newsroom and try to, practice what you just learned. And then I still believe that internships and training within a news organization is probably the most helpful thing, especially if you want to change the way. So you have to change the media organization you work at and see a different way of doing things, and then try that different way, try to be part of the different ecosystem. So I was also launching a journalism exchange program that is still on in Ukraine, exchanging journalists from different newsrooms, from west to east, from central to northern parts of the country, seeing how different newsrooms work, how different newsroom structures work. I think that's what we were trying to do. And then I think the next level after the practice is basically hands-on help. Because when we speak about training, what we want is to teach people to do new things, like to the new tricks. But I don't think there's a better way than just showing people how to do it and helping them do it. So it's more like in a coaching area, or mentorship area, or consulting area, where the specialist can come to a person with a very specific ask or demand or a need, and then help them change what they need to be changed.
So more on a kind of, where possible, that kind of like one-to-one level, where it's
one-to-one or one to a specific team of people who has a need of changing something.
Thank you. And Sue, I guess, in your experience, I guess, in programs that you've supported, like what have you seen are the most effective ways, the most effective ways that have worked?
Yeah, so thanks for the invitation to be here. I mean, I guess I should start off by saying we really don't believe much in training programs. And we've tried really, how to ensure that the training meets the demands and the needs in the newsroom at the time. And so that ultimately the journalism can better serve its audiences, not just for the sake of learning new things and that journalists become empowered, but ultimately in order to actually reach a community that you're serving. So we've tried a couple of things that, we've tried a few things, and I'm really interested to hear also from you what you believe would be useful. But one of the initiatives was to design a kind of technical assistance package where we worked both with the knowledge that we had as being a donor to a number of organizations, and we hired people who work in the area of technical assistance and building that kind of capacity. We worked with them, and together we spoke to the newsroom, they interviewed the newsroom, and together designed a kind of package of what would be a useful intervention around a particular issue that they wanted to solve. So that was the one thing. And related to that, we found that one of the most effective ways for information to be exchanged that is useful is creating conversations among newsroom editors and journalists, and critically the business people who work in newsrooms, so that experiences are shared, the disasters and the failures are also shared, and the successes are shared, and that peer-to-peer communication from journalist or marketing person or business person in the newsroom really talks to the needs that I think, even though contexts differ, the challenges are very similar. And the last thing that we've tried most recently is thinking about the whole coming AI scenario and what's ahead of us, and the changes that we think are going to be quite profound to the journalism or information ecosystem, is we initiate a challenge, and we kind of invited people to apply who were interested and from that made a selection and then brought a group of people together. And some of you might have attended the AI scenario report back session that there was. And I mean, 900 people from around the world applied to that, and we had to select 40 who then came together for a series of scenario planning. But that was, in a way, it allowed people to opt in and select whether they thought that this was something that might be useful to them. And hopefully it is. So those were some of the ways that we've tried to do or support different forms of training. And as I said, I'm interested to hear from, well, my colleagues and also from you. What do you think might work?
It's interesting you say about the kind of the business with the kind of editorial, because there's always the natural divide, right? And there's always the kind of, it's like the line you don't cross, but
yeah.
Where I think certainly I've seen like the most effective news strategies is where those two things do come kind of, you know, closer together, and that they're working as a team that drives forward the strategies. No, I want to go to Jakub, because I'm interested in your perspective on, I guess, the current like quality of media training that's out there, the current, you know, availability and quality of media education that exists, and how that sort of compares with other fields outside of journalism.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that question, Kelly. Okay. So one thing that just to sort of, I think, bears repeating is a lot of the education that is happening now in media is just a covert way to actually fund media organizations. And, you know, just 2 weeks ago, I ran into a colleague who runs a fairly large, sort of dynamic, vibrant media organization. She was incredibly frustrated, and she said, like, Jakub, like, please just tell all of these funders that we are not trainers, we are not professors, we are not sitting in some kind of ivory tower, we are journalists and we need funding for journalism. Stop sending us to trainings or sending us as trainers, right? And, you know, that happens a lot. And just if you think about sort of what is happening there, the sort of economics of it, you know, donors say, okay, let's put 10% or 20% of our budgets towards trainings. Media are like, okay, how can we sort of plug next month's cash gap with that? And so they need to send people out to do trainings, right? So they lose them in the newsroom. It's very tiring to train people, so they lose all of this energy. The other people are, you know, it's a little bit like for those who, you know, born in a communist country, they pretend to pay us, we pretend to work, right? So it's kind of one of those things. And if you look at the conversion of how much of that 10 or 20% of a donor's budget actually ends up helping media, well, I mean, trickle-down economics looks like the paradigm of efficient and sort of well-thought-out policy. I mean, you might as well sort of give Elon Musk another tax cut in the hopes that it would somehow magically fill media budgets, right? But to the question of how much should we be spending, right? So before the panel, I had a look at what's sort of the average across other industries. And this number kept popping up quite repeatedly that, you know, about $1,500 per employee per year for organizations that are smallish, but the smaller you get, the more you should be spending, right? And by the way, we have a problem with data in media, so very difficult to actually say what that means, right? But I looked at some research from the JX Fund on the Russian independent media sector in exile. So there's, you know, 1,500 more or less journalists out there. That comes out to a number of about 2.5 million a year that should be spent. Now, if you look at donor budgets, and again, this is all reading the tea leaves because there's no sort of integrated and transparent area, that probably feels about right. That's probably about the amount that we're spending. But given that we're not actually spending it on the things that people want, the things that they actually need in the newsrooms, well, then this is just money that is being poured down the drain, so, or partially poured down the drain. So, you know, to answer your question, I think funding-wise, we're probably around there. It might be a bit more, might be a bit less. But there's really a question about what we're doing with these trainings, the level of innovation, and, you know, lots of thoughts on that, but you know, maybe we'll get into that later. But just one thing, you know, that Sue mentioned about sort of AI. Look, we need also innovation in the way that we do the trainings. Trainings are not just you send people to a nice country or you send a trainer to an exotic country, let's be honest, that's often how it looks, to give a bunch of presentations and then fly off, right? There's a lot of innovation there. But you know, where is AI and where is, for example, the use of e-learnings, a very cost-effective way to bring on board new people who are joining an organization? How many media actually do that? I know a couple. I think most don't. E-learnings first appeared on a conference about how Disney educates its staff in 1999. That's 25 years ago, right? So there's quite a bit of catching up to do. Maybe I'll pause there, but yeah.
But I'm interested in kind of linking that to like almost like the kind of the pipeline and bringing in new people and I mean, Daryna, you set up J School within the Kyiv Independent because there was nothing else serving you, right? Can you talk a little bit more about J School and how it works and has it worked? Do you think has it achieved the things that you thought it was going to?
Well, yeah, we hired a couple of people from the J School. Sorry, I forgot about the button. We did hire a few people, and well, our general purpose was to teach more Ukrainian journalists to write properly in English, to sort of amplify the voices of Ukrainians in the kind of international information scene, which is needed, and there's a whole different conversation about why and like why that's part of the Kyiv Independence mission. But our internal goal was also to make sure that we find the right people for ourselves to keep executing our mission. And that is a problem because we need a very specific set of skills for the Kyiv Independence. So that has to be a person who knows Ukraine, the context and the history, and not just Ukraine, but also the region with the post-Soviet countries, the history of Ukrainian and Russian relationship, who speaks Ukrainian, or at least some Russian, or, you know, but preferably Ukrainian more and more, who's fluent in English, who is a professional journalist, editor, or a media manager, depending on who we're looking for. And believe it or not, it's very hard to find.
Sounds like it.
So it is a bottleneck for us across pretty much every work stream, including editorial and management. So our idea was to see if we can, okay, so let's probably accept that we can't find people who are a ready-made fit into the team, but maybe we can help some people grow who actually want to be a fit. We can train them and then we can hire them. So that was the goal. We started from the editorial, and I think we found a few people, trained and found a few people who matched the skill set at the end and became part of the team, and we are very grateful for that experience. That said, it was just the first try, and I think we'll be doing it again, but we'll probably change a few things. It took some time and effort from the whole team, so the organization and the logistics of it, but also the contents of it, and thinking what are the right things to train to also like add to the bigger mission, but like to achieve our internal goals. So that's a whole different work stream. That's a lot of training, and that's a lot of innovation that actually have to happen from an iteration to an iteration. So our next school will be very different from the previous one. And I think, by the way, that is what's kind of lacking in general kind of journalism education. I've seen same trainings with same mistakes happening over and over, like every year. Same trainers, same audiences, same things taught. Nothing changed from year to year, even though media industry is a very fast-growing and fast-changing environment, you know, like new tools appear all the time. I'm not even talking, let's use AI or e-learnings. Probably we're kind of even far away from that, but let's at least change the agenda, you know, like let's try to find a focus that is relevant for this year or this particular team or this particular region. Even that is not happening. So I think to do the education, not even just journalism education, any industry education relevant, you have to iterate quite a lot, and you have to have someone there who is actually a practitioner, who works in the industry every day, and who can rethink and reevaluate what is important on the market today. And that would be our approach. But for us, and probably that is where J-School got a lot of traction internationally, the Kyiv Independent J-School. And I think one of the reasons for that is probably we have to actually give journalism education to the newsrooms. That is a way, that is a way how we make sure that people who are doing the trainings know what they actually need. They are the industry experts. They will be using that talent that they are training. So, what's the better way to kind of fix the problem?
Well, coming on to the kind of that point around who are the trainers, if you bring it in house, then it's going to be very tailored to your needs. You've got some really specific needs about what you need your kind of reporters and journalists to be, but then you don't always necessarily have the skills even in house to do that. And did you bring in any external, or who makes the best trainers? I know it's going to be different in each scenario, but did you bring anybody external, or it was all done?
We did. Yes, we did bring a few trainers external, but we'll bring even more next time. Most of the trainers who spent a lot of time on site were our staffers. But at the same time, we need very specific things, but at the same time, it's not like we are a standalone case. We do share a lot of needs with a lot of other organizations. The skill set we are requesting is not some unicorn skill set. That is a skill set is we need accurate journalism, we need fact checking, we need good language skills, we need good reporting skills, good editing skills. That's pretty universal for a news organization. So I actually don't think, and I do believe that we created kind of added value for not just the Kyiv Independent, but also a lot of other organizations. I know that a lot of smaller media companies in the regions, for example, launched their English language versions or started writing and reporting in English, pitching their stories to the international media, which was the ultimate goal of it. So we had the niche, but I think we had a niche and also this a bigger goal. But I also think that any organization who wants to do it for themselves, they are experts for themselves, and they might be able to find a bigger goal that can intensify, kind of amplify other media's efforts. And, journalists are very particular people. They have trust in practitioners. So they need to see that the people talking to them are actual people doing the job, not somebody, on the white horse who is telling us how to do the job. And that's, by the way, what often happens in journalism training.
Jakub, I just want to come back to you on the point of, you were talking about kind of e-learning was a thing 25 years ago, but today, in terms of the platforms that are available, are they being underutilized?
Well, yes, they're actually being surprisingly underutilized. So one of the things that is almost quite puzzling for me is sort of why there are no content creators on YouTube or TikTok that are actually talking about journalism in an educational manner. So, and again, going back to the data, a Pew Research report from 2018, half of YouTube users used YouTube to learn about new things. Now, a lot of that is how to do a good carbonara or fix your sink or your washing machine. But there's also a lot of content that is very industry specific, where people, it's not quite academic education, but, journalism is a trade. So it's actually quite practical. You'd think that would be relatively well suited to an online format, right? And the thing that sort of has me a little bit puzzled is why nobody has gone and done that. And just to give you a sense of how big this can be, right? So, if you use Excel quite a bit and you use TikTok, you'll find that there's 1 million videos explaining how to use TikTok better. One of the pioneers of doing that goes by the handle Miss Excel. A couple of years ago, Miss Excel was making $100,000 a month off of e-learnings and teaching based off of TikTok. Now she has $100,000 days. because her trainings are being bought by big corporates, Salesforce, Microsoft, I forget which logos were on there, but they, you'd recognize them, all of the sort of the big players. And, there's a real question, and I think this is a question that as people who work in media, we kind of need to challenge ourselves a little bit here. Is like, why is there no demand for this? Why are people, because sooner or later someone would pop up, right? Are we actually making an effort to think about what are the needs that we need for ourselves, for our newsrooms? And, are we seeing the right level of entrepreneurship as well on the other side, right? So it's really a gap once you notice it. It's conspicuous by its absence.
And is that like a cultural thing? Is that like a kind of like I don't know.
I think there. Well. Yeah.
In terms of journalism culture, not
there
like
is, there is a lot of issues here that I think are tied to journalism culture, which is one, the majority of people working in media are probably more on the introvert scale. They're not necessarily, especially if you work in written form. I know that's the case for me. It's not that comfortable. You get used to sort of talking to large groups after a while, but a lot of people don't love that. Journalism is not visually compelling. That's why a lot of the
unlike Excel.
Unlike Excel, right? Which is like super exciting and sexy, and everyone sort of loves that. So maybe like I don't think we try hard enough. Like you do need to make an effort to kind of make it interesting. But look, for finance, for those who work there, you probably know Investopedia, which is a great media project. By the way, where is the Mediapedia?
Probably because of
that name is trademarked, by the way. That you can't use that. You can't use that.
Maybe we should make that.
Yeah.
Do not build another tool that no one uses, please. It's like, is it because there isn't really a demand for this training? And until now, most of this training has been offered by people who get in front of donors and say, well, we think that this is the problem, and we're going to go in and offer this. Or organizations who have only really had much experience of saying, well, if we ask for a training, that means this donor will actually come and provide a training, and we'll get a per diem or a little bit of money for our organization. And that's the way that there's any kind of potential support for the organization coming in. And I think that this is part of the problem. It's like, what is the demand? What are the needs that need to be solved? And going onto YouTube to look for a solution is not really where I think most journalists are, but I think it starts with what's the need? I mean, what are people looking for? And how best to solve that?
I think there is, so I might be a bit skeptical about learning journalism on YouTube or TikTok because it's a craft. After all, you have to do a lot of it many times with your own hands before you actually start doing it well. But at the same time, I think there is this, maybe I will be sounding like an old person, but, which I'm not, by the way, if you haven't noticed. But like, I remember when I started working as a reporter, like 12 years ago, I remember being so excited about it. Like I was so excited about every story I was doing. Like it was like the most interesting job in the world. I was like fighting to get a story from the editor, and I don't see a lot of that in the newsrooms these days. Like it seems like younger journalists kind of they're not inspired enough by journalism, even though journalism is still like, especially now when there are wars around the world, that journalists are doing like one of the most important, most dangerous, and also most romantic jobs. But this is not how it's seen. Like we got all swamped in thinking that journalism is like, it doesn't pay bills, it's kind of boring, it's like the editor won't allow you to do the right stories and blah, blah, blah. But this is not it. And I think that TikTok and YouTube could do the inspiration thing. Like, what if journalists actually went on TikTok and started talking about how cool the job is? Like, what important stories they're covering, how they're making change, what is the impact of it? And I think that's something we can be doing. Also, I think that there is an opportunity for the actual teaching, because, I mean, if we're journalism teaching journalists, that's probably not going to fly, but actually, if you think about it, everyone in the world is doing journalism. It's just in very different ways. So what if journalists took that upon themselves and started like teaching how to write a Facebook post, or how to actually tweet news properly, or how to, you know, shoot a TikTok video that actually makes sense, or how to talk to the audiences. So well, a lot of things that could be shared with a lot of different industries, and journalists could make money of it as well, you know, not just educate people.
I mean, so you talked about how potentially, like, you know, in the past, how easy it might be for media organisations to kind of fall into that trap almost of like training as a subsidy. Yeah. Do you think there is a shift? Like, do you think we are seeing like a shift from both like the media orgs, like in terms of speaking and saying this isn't actually really working for us, and also the funder strategies evolving, that they want to support more like longer term strategies?
I mean,
you can't speak for all funders, but I guess in terms of your observations of the landscape.
I mean, I think it takes some courage to actually say to a funders offering this, and you say, actually, we don't want this, we want that. But I think that it's actually a really important thing to do, to be clear about what you need and what you're trying to achieve. And the clearer you are focused about that, then you can actually begin to have a meaningful conversation. I think there was in an earlier panel, there was a discussion with some of the journalists who are in exile. And I wasn't in the session, but from what I was told, there were suggestions being offered to them, you should get together, you should do it like this. And they said, no, that's not what we need. We need this and this and this. And I think that funders respect that. I mean, you want to put your money somewhere where people actually understand the circumstances, understand the problem, and have got some ideas of how they're going to solve that problem. And I think increasingly, I would like to believe that increasingly there is that. I do think that there are a number of organizations that have made their reputations very much as the middle people sometimes between the funders and the media organizations that do the work, and have got a very old and tried and tested model. And I think that perhaps, and I may be speaking out of turn here, but are they really meeting the needs of those media organizations? And I think that that's where there's a space for more of a conversation as well.
I think I've always found it kind of quite fascinating around, the notion that funding salaries isn't strategic, where the effort that it takes to hire and retain people, to be able to fund salaries to keep those people is one of the most, in my opinion, one of the most strategic things you can do to keep great talent, to find and keep great talent, to drive to then, because otherwise your strategies are never going to come to
Absolutely
life.
Agree. And I think donors realize, I mean, we know that you need the staff to do the work, but I think it's around, again, clarity of purpose and do you have the right staff in the right positions? Editorial staff, there's always journalists going to tell stories, right? That's what journalists do. But do you have a business person who's really thinking about what is the revenue, and are you thinking about the level of engagement with your audience, not just producing the content? And so is your organization structured in the best possible way? And I think we certainly would value that, and I think many other donors too.
And I think that's where actually the other very innovative thing can come in. How about the cross-industry trainings? Not journalists just teaching journalists, but better journalists teaching the junior journalists. But journalism industry is so far behind. The e-learnings is just one thing, but there is no HR in journalism still. Unless you are the Guardian, you don't have an HR department or any idea of the HR function as such. And this is still happening in the 2024. We don't talk to other industries. We don't talk to retail, to IT. We don't take over these practices. But maybe we don't want to hear more from journalists and editors. Maybe we want to hear from the HRD from the IT company, or somebody who does marketing for the retail company. Maybe that's how we should start learning, because frankly, I've been doing the media development, being a trainer and a trainee and a consultant for a while now, and it seems like it's a bit of a robot vacuum cleaner situation, we meet a challenge and we're like, oh, that's a challenge. Okay, so let's think about solving it next year. We meet the same challenge, the same chair, we're just like, boom, it's not being solved. Well, because it's a closed environment, we have to open it. We have to invite other people, other experts from different industries to talk to us, and we have to be open to accept the things they're saying. Great point.
So I think also one of the problems, just to build on what was said before, is that from a funding perspective, I also do training, so I know that, I'm sort of undermining myself here, but, like asking people who do a lot of trainings if media need training is like asking a psychologist if people need therapy. I mean, yes, therapy is a good thing. Everyone needs a little bit of it at some point in their life, but that putting that person in charge of sort of organizing it for everybody, I mean, you're going to be talked to death, right? Or trained to death. So there's a problem of the demand needs to come from the other side. But I want to just take a moment to mention one thing which often gets forgotten. I think that's also really, really important. But before I do that, is anyone here a representative of an academic journalism department? Okay. 2 people. All right, good. So this is not directed at you, right? Personally. But I have a real question about what the hell is happening in the journalism academia to journalism the trade pipeline. And I think there's something fundamentally broken there, because a lot of countries have a lot of journalism departments, media studies departments. We're talking about tens of thousands of people for mid-sized European countries every year who come out of these departments. And I know so few media managers that have relationships with those departments and that hire for them. And this is a really worrying question, right? And I had a chance to sort of discuss this with somebody who turns out was representative of the Association of Journalism Departments of Europe, and me coming at this very critically was not sort of well received. But think about it this way: if we were training all of these doctors and the hospital said, well, we don't hire from med schools, would we have cause for concern? Right? So I think there's something fundamental, and I'm not saying it's just the fault on academia. I think there is a lot on the journalism side. The media managers should be building these relationships. But the fact that there's so few representatives, there's so few intermingling between these 2 big blocks, I think that's concerning.
That's very easy to explain. I don't know, the Western Europe, but Eastern Europe, most of the professors in the journalism academia, they are not practitioners. They have never worked in journalism for a day. So the stuff they're teaching, the editors are very skeptical about. The journalists who come out of it, they are also skeptical about it. So everybody's skeptical about it. So journalists had to do a few internships before they can actually get into the newsroom and be, on the same level with at least the junior stuff. I don't know the situation in Western Europe. Maybe it's better. I've been offered once to teach a course in a Kyiv J School, Kyiv University J School. Frankly, that's charity. So they kind of paid me something, but that's a joke. That entails so much paperwork. I mean, I had an assistant who did it for me, but that's just not worth it. The Eastern European J schools just never made it accessible and interesting for practitioners and professionals in media to actually contribute. And so there is that broken link.
Thank you. I'm very keen to kind of hear from the floor as well. So we're going to have some mics going around. Just stick up your hand if you have a question for the panel, and we'll get a mic. So one at the back, one at the front. If you just say kind of who you are and if it's for a specific panelist or a general question.
Hello, my name is Mikael. I represent the University in Bergen, the journalism school. So I just wanted to say hi to you. But I think you're right. we have a bachelor program, and we have the 4 last years, everyone going out of that has got a job. What we've done is we hired people that have been or are journalists. All of the department, we don't look at degrees, we look at where have you been, what have you done. So we think that we teach people journalism, and we have a close relationship. We are in the same building as the main TV and radio stations in Norway and the regional newspapers in Bergen. So there is no wall between our students and their future job place. So I think your criticism is right, and you have to hire people that actually do journalism. So it's actually not a question, it's just a support.
No, thank you for mentioning that. By the way, I mean, I really am envious of the Bergen sort of model, because I think there is a lot of industry relationships that went into building that, and I wish we had that in other places around Europe. But yeah, it's a thank you for that.
Hi, it's kind of a comment, if that's okay. My name is Corinne Podger. I look after programs and education at an Australian non-profit called the Walkley Foundation. Before that, I was a contract trainer for 5 years. So I'm hearing, I suppose, the feedback I have is, or comment I have is that what you've seen and shared is bad practice. And there's a lot of poor practice. And so I suppose I had a number of comments, but I guess one of the pieces of feedback perhaps from the training sector, there are things like e-learning platforms. BBC Media Action has one, Thompson Foundation has one, the Knight Foundation has its MOOC platform. So some of this is actually sharing information about what exists already. Also, there are programs which do pre-scoping of learning, right? So before a group of learners attends a training, they're pre-scoped. Who's done it before, etc. So I guess one of the things I would say to our beloved donors is it's good to do two things. One is to think, who's done the training before already? Yeah? If you go to the Pacific Islands, you will find in a country like Fiji that every journalist has attended at least 5 climate journalism training sessions. And really, honestly, that's partly the donor's responsibility. Yeah? Also, with love, I would say it would be great for a condition of funding to share information at the end of the program, the MERLA, monitoring, evaluation, learning outcomes, with other projects. So a condition of receiving this money is that some of your MERLA outcomes are shared with other people, so you don't reinvent the wheel. Yeah. And one last thing, if I may, I think that the point you make about quality of trainers is really important. Yeah. A good qualified trainer will produce outcomes for the exact same content with the exact same learners that will be better than perhaps someone who's not such a great trainer. And there's often not money built into programming to vet trainers. Sometimes the project gets a green light 3 weeks before. Suddenly it's, oh God, we need a trainer. Who's available? Surprise, the good ones are already booked. So you also think a little bit about that, just to increase the runway a little bit would produce better results. I'm sorry, it's not a question. It's just a bit of comment.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good to bring in, like you say, the good practices. Like I think all of us are involved and have been involved in trainings, right? And I guess definitely not kind of to beat up on our trainings. And part of this is really to hear how do you make it the most effective? How do you make it really work for the strategies that they're trying to drive, and there's some good stuff out there, so the comments are really good to hear. And again, if anybody else has got kind of comments either now, and we've still got a few minutes left for questions, so just raise your hand, otherwise write them on the cards.
I have a very short question. So I'm software engineer, so for me this discussion is very interesting because I would say in software engineering the majority of the cases the study is individual contributors driven. So I find myself study, right? I'm training myself because if I'm not, then tomorrow I'm not going to have job anymore. I have to constantly learn. Do you think the problem is in journalism maybe that there is a bit of a lack motivation of individual contributors to look for this? That's why they cannot find anything on the YouTube. That's why demand is not there, because maybe the motivation of the journalists themselves is not so high to learn new things.
Well, first of all, you make way more money than we do. Like, guys, of course you are motivated more. That's like, I mean, I'm sorry, we all are missionaries, but let's face the truth. Like, every person is motivated by money, and in journalism, we don't make a lot of money. So it's not like you have to, like, bring yourself up to a better standard every day because the next career stage for you is just right there and you have to jump it before someone else does. No, it's not like that in journalism. You also have to risk your life a lot. So, well, unless you're a very missionary and a very brave person, you have to educate yourself perhaps to be able to do your job safely, to do your job better, or to do a bit of a different job. If you are bored just writing text, for example, you can teach yourself to do video or to do podcasts or to do newsletters, or then probably you can go into media management and start thinking distribution, right? But these are kind of all different jobs, so there's not a lot of leveling in general journalism job. It's just very different industries, so it's kind of hard to compare, but there are things that we can take from the software engineering, and I frankly don't think that inspiration, but I think that's structure that journalism is lacking. So if we could show more growth opportunities and what would be the next step and so we are also very vague about the skill set needed for being a good journalist. We're like, you have to learn on the job. What does it mean? Like, what skills? Do you need soft skills, hard skills? What hard skills? We break it down. That's something also very specific to journalism. We are very vague about the standard of work, and the standard differs a lot from a newsroom to newsroom. So what's okay in one newsroom is not not acceptable in a different newsroom, but that's the same industry.
It's similar in IT, actually.
Yeah. Okay, so probably we should both work on that, but generally fixing the structure and fixing the growth opportunities, and paying more money to the people who are actually, that is something we should go to.
Hello, my name is Lena. I work as a product manager in Schibsted Aftenposten. I feel that I'm the only product manager at this conference. Product and the digital product and what is inside the product, the journalism, is one. So firstly, I want to comment that we need to learn together, bridge the gap. I do training in that, and I missed that in the discussion. Secondly, I have been a journalist for 10 years before I have been a product manager for 10 years. And I want to support the other here, because when I was a journalist, I was working constantly as a news presenter. There was no time. As a product manager now, I can do training virtually on something, and I have a 10% day every second Friday that I can use to train myself to do better in some skills. And we need to get this into journalism too, because we need time. Because you can't go to a short course and think you're going to learn something in 45 minutes. You need time to practice, and that's with now in Aftenposten. We need more video editors, more to film. Then we need to give them the same time as tech people and product people to actually train, because you can't do this in 45 minutes. What do you need to learn something new? 10,000 hours or something? We can't give you every journalist that, but we could give them some time every month, a Libra day, where I can actually dive into something that is important for business to move and get the new and better audience. That was a comment too, but I'm very engaged in this topic.
I mean, just to say, I think we're not saying that training isn't relevant and useful. I think it's where does the need come from, and does the training meet the need, and what does it look like? And I think very often, and hence the premise for the title, is that asking for training becomes, actually, it's not what you need. You need resources, you need funding for particular things, you need to solve certain problems, and then you can tailor the training that's meaningful for that purpose.
I agree very much on the bridging the gap between the product and the editorial. I didn't mention that in particular because, frankly, there are so many gaps we need to bridge. Like, it's between product and and editorial. It's between the marketing and editorial. It's between the commercial and editorial. There are like a lot of gaps, and a lot of newsrooms has to be educated not just on like the specific skill set they need for their job, but also on what's the business model looks like in journalism. Like journalists have to understand all the different parts that making their journalism happen. What happens after the story is written and published? Like a lot of journalists don't understand that, including at the Kyiv Independent. We've just done the satisfaction survey, and the comments I've seen, they're like, we don't understand why we need 3 SMM managers. Well, there has to be some explaining to do, and that's not a given. We haven't been talking about that to journalists for a long time. We can't expect them to just know. No one's talking to them about that in the J schools, by the way. So they have no idea that they are part of a business model. Some of them think that it's someone else's problem to make money for their journalism. It's not theirs. So yeah, there are a lot of that, and I very much agree. The product is, a blind spot for many newsrooms too.
Thank you, everybody. That just, we are all out of time. Please write any thoughts on your cards, leave them on your seats. Thanks for your engagement. Thank you very much to all of the panelists. A really great discussion. And have a good rest of the festival.